recap for HBP. Just a small rundown. We are a student-run organization. We post free content during midterms and finals for students by students. We give a short presentation and answer any of your questions at the end of the call. We post content exclusively on our website at ehlrecap.tk. If you forget the link, don't worry, you can always log on to our Instagram, ehl.recap. We have reminders on future recap sessions and anything else you need to know. I will send both of these links in the group chat. Just as a reminder, we aren't affiliated with EHL, so don't keep us accountable if you fail. However, we have worked with professors and students who have taken this class before to put up this material and make sure it is up to proper standards. Kim, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alex. Hi guys, welcome to this HBP recap session. I hope you're all doing well. I hope the math exam went reasonably well, and I hope you've all recovered. And if you have any mental breakdowns, I think EHL counselor will be able to help in the future. But yeah, let's focus on this. Tutoring session, I've organized it in a very specific way. Everything is based on Professor Fernandez's course, because I think all the HBP courses are more or less the same, but we have difference in, like, some teachers, they put a bit more emphasis on certain theories or concepts, and other teachers like that. This is basically, as I said, based on the course of Professor Fernandez. If you have any questions, guys, please just stop me in the middle when I'm talking. I'm going to answer it, and then we can move on. Please don't be shy. I'm not going to bite. I've had lunch, so yeah, that's it. Let's start. So how this is structured, can you all see the screen, the slides, by the way, just to confirm?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect, awesome. So what I did is I have had a rundown of everything that we have in LMS, of all the theories, and I've tried to have all the concepts from each chapter combined into one slide that you see here, and then I'm explaining every concept that we've had, every big concept, let's say. The smaller theories I have not put into account because obviously it's a rundown, otherwise it will be way too long. But what I would suggest you do after this session, or for the final exam, because you have to refer to theories, what I would do is just take all the theories or concepts we had over the course and make a cheat sheet where you explain, like in one sentence maybe, what the theory is about, just to have a little reminder, and that makes it much easier to look for stuff during the final. So that's how I'm going to prepare for it, and I think it's can be pretty helpful. So let's go with the first session we've had about teamwork, and we're talking about the Ringelmann effect. So basically what you have is that group size has a negative consequence on performance. What you see here is the graph, basically what the potential output is and what the actual output is. And there is, why that is mainly because of social loathing, which means there's motivational problems in bigger groups. So as you see here, basically the ideal group size is 2 to 3, but after that, already 4, 5, it will start decreasing performance quite rapidly. And then there is also lack of coordination mostly, because a lot of teams don't know how to coordinate themselves. So that's about the Ringelmann effects. So here we have this, the Tuckman model of team development would be maybe a question that would be worth it to do. It's the 4 phases we have for a group performance, which is forming, storming, norming, and performing. There is a few more details on there. So as we also said, I think Alex said it before, all the PowerPoints are also available. This PowerPoint exactly is available on EHL Recap as well, so you can have a read through it. Basically what forming is about getting together, developing ground rules, and assigning tasks. This is the first step of a group performance. That's what we do at the beginning of our semester with every group. Then is a storming phase where we don't really know each other. We try to figure out where we stand in the group. Okay, what position do we have? So we have a bit of a resistance and a bit of a struggle to find our places and to form the group. And then we go to norming, where we have the group harmony, it settles in, everyone knows what they're doing, everyone knows their place, and so on and so on. And then it's the performing phase where we can get to work and get some stuff done. That's basically the whole model. And of course, the goal is to go from forming to performing as quickly as possible. That's like the baseline over everything. what makes great teams? By the way, those little R numbers are the relevance to, or the connotation negatively or positively to which degree the theory or the concept occurs to actual performance. So members' personality is very important. So conscientiousness and agreeableness, as we've had in the Big Five model, you know that. You've written your midterm essay about that. So they perform, or they have shown to be very good indicators of members of group performance in terms of members' personality. Conflict, relationship conflict, and task conflict is a different point here. This is also what's important. Relationship conflicts can be very destructive, but tasks conflict are obviously very important because they will push for better solutions and then ultimately for better performance. And of course, cohesion. So similarities in a team from what goals do we have as a team, etc., are very important to good team performance. So, team diversity and performance, like what are the positive and negative effects of it? So we have is positive connotation is functional and educational backgrounds, gender and cultural diversity is either plus or minus depending on the situation you're facing in, and age and organizational tenure, they don't really have any positive or negative connotation with it. That's the team diversity. So conflict management and communication by Blake and Moten. It's about how you solve conflicts and how we are able to develop solutions because of that. So we have collaborating, competing, compromising, accommodating, and avoiding. And this is basically on which level someone is uncooperative or cooperative, and unassertive and assertive. And of course, the effectiveness of all of those 5 different strategies depends on the situation, depends on the task, etc., etc. So everything that's issue importance is about competing and collaborating. So it's about getting something done which is about an issue, a specific issue. Then relationship importance. Maybe it will be better. We can't obviously say that just in general, but maybe it will be better maybe to avoid or to accommodate. If you want to go in a relational perspective. And time constraints, obviously, then something it's like about competing and compromising maybe a bit too long, take a bit too much time if you have time constraints in your tasks. Now let's go to the rules of effective communication. What is effective communication is basically we have first problem-oriented versus person-oriented. Of course, we should always give critique and communicate about a problem and about the task and not about the person, because this will obviously make the person feel bad and also decrease performance. Descriptive versus evaluation. So what we have here is the report contains spelling mistakes versus you did not check the spelling mistakes. What sounds better for you in this case? So obviously the report contains spelling mistakes, which is much more task focused and much more neutral rather than an evaluation already of the performance of the individual. And specific versus the global is very important that you're not saying you're in general, you're a bad person in general, but in this specific instant, okay, what didn't go right in this specific instant. And owned versus disowned, exactly. I would appreciate if you could voice more often your ideas, or you should speak in every meeting, which is basically a bit of a discrepancy. Obviously, depends also on the personality, how you communicate in that case. Guidelines for effective meetings. What we should do is before we should set a time for the meeting and agenda construction. This is very important because it will make you help stick to it, to an agenda. Then during, we share leadership, so everyone has their specific tasks that they have an ownership or leadership over, and develop competence in leading meetings. It's a very much a practice thing, right? And after you evaluate the quality of the meeting and obviously make improvements according to what you do. Now, skills in leading meetings, I'm gonna go over that. I think it's pretty quickly, you can quickly read that, but that's basically derived from the Rogelberg concept. what you need to do. So, second topic is reaching goals. We're going to have the ability, the marshmallow experiment. As we've seen the video with kids who were given marshmallows, and the task was to not eat it until a certain time, and they will get another one. And this is in that far is important because this shows you that kids that have been able to not eat the marshmallow over the course of the time have shown stronger resilience. They are in later life more successful. So what the scientists have done in this case, they have caught up with the kids, the same kids, a few years later when they were in professional environments, and has shown that those people who can deny or delay gratification have had better performance. But effective procrastination, I think now it's the time to not procrastinate anymore. I think that's the what we can say at the moment. But what we've had in the longitudinal study of Thies and Baumeister, what we have, of course, people who procrastinate have beginning of the semester low stress, high stress towards the end of the semester, which we are obviously right now, which equals to lower grades if you procrastinate. However, there's also the study of Kim, Fernandez, and Terrier, which distinguishes even between passive and active procrastination. So passive procrastination is what you have a lack of ability to self-regulate. So you technically want to do it, but you're not doing it because you're procrastinating. That's unplanned or passive procrastination, which will then lead to distress, anxiety, etc., etc. It's quite a negative experience, as I think we've all got to know at some point. And active is, of course, you choose to procrastinate to a specific point, but then you have a plan on how to do it. In the end, it has better outcomes because you know exactly that you're doing it and why you're doing it. Power of pre-commitment, basically, that's what we've had before. That actually pre-committing and setting that is very helpful in the long term and will ultimately lead to better results. So the planning fallacy, the role of planning fallacy is very a thing that I think all of us have experienced as well. It's about people that take too little resources into account for a specific task. So we might think that a task doesn't take as much as it does in the end take to do. For example, for certain group projects we've had, let's say for the marketing video we've had to do, we said, okay, it's going to be very easy, like super quickly done. But then it proves that, okay, we have to edit it, we have to write a script, etc., etc. So it takes much more time. And what examples are the Berlin airport, and obviously in the US at the moment, also taking and counting ballots is apparently a very lengthy process. Joke aside. So here we go about goal setting theory. This is something that I think all of you know, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timed. As goals should all contain all those smart factors, then it is a good goal, because then you can also stick to it and you can measure it, which is very important, obviously, for you. And specific and difficult goals are very important because that will lead in the end to better performance. Because if you set just a goal that's very easily attainable, you might not even follow through on it, and you might even underperform. However, if you set a very high goal, you perform better, and even if you're not quite attaining the goal, you're still going to reach very high. That's what that have shown. And there are moderators and mediators in setting goals or in pursuing that goal, which is the ability, feedback, commitment, and task complexity, which can moderate your performance, and mediate, obviously, direction, intensity, persistence, knowledge, and task strategies. So here we see just a quick thing that how goal setting theory works and how effective it is. So we see that on the right hand side that actually the goal setting is way quicker because your baseline is already higher when you set a goal, and then in the end you will perform gradually better and get to a better result. GTE. If you have too much to do it, you have a lot of open loops. So you have a lot of stuff that's in your head. You have a lot of you might get lost easily. I would say, put it that way. So is the issue is that people think of, but they not actually do anything about the problems, and you cannot do a project. You can only do actions. This is very important. So if you're thinking about a very big project, you have to do is not about, okay, how can I achieve the project? What do I like? How can I do it? And it's going to be overwhelming because it's quite a big compiled number of tasks that you have to do. So you have to do actions in order to complete every single little task in order to then actually be able to achieve that project. So the GDT method is capture, process, organize, reflect, and do. So capture is putting everything in one place, then you process it. For example, capture can be just writing everything down without just categorizing it, just putting everything together, then process it, okay, review each item, okay, is it relevant, not relevant, and so on and so on. Then you organize, okay, in a time plan, how can I do it, and then you also put the importance of it in there, and then you reflect, and then you do. This is how you can very easily, in 5 simple steps, you can get quite a large number of goals in your life sorted and make it more effective. Now the synchrony effect is about morning and evening people with the skills code as well. Basically, that morning types, they have, in general, as you can see on the graph, generally a very slightly lower performance as their peak performance than evening types, but there is both, basically both ways. And then Parkinson's law as well. So work expense has to fill a time available for its completion. Always interesting to see when we have a project, or from our experience, I can tell you from, for example, the F&B case study. In our group, we've had quite a good start, quite a lot of stuff done in the beginning, but then of course in the end it took quite a bit more time than we've wanted, because we've had enough time, and that's how we fill the time. And that's something that you have to be aware of course, then to counteract that. The time management matrix, Wheaton and Cameron. So we have important, urgent, what that is. So this is how you prioritize your tasks, or your what you have to do. So important, urgent is everything that has high priority. Obviously, that you have to do now. Urgent but not important. This is something that you have to you can lay off a little bit later. Well, not urgent but important, you should do that as well, because it's obviously important but not necessarily urgent. If you do that a second, as you can see, 1, 2, and 3, and then not urgent, not important, everything that's busy work or some emails, phone calls, time wasters, everything you should absolutely eliminate, because that will just eat up your time, and you cannot focus anymore on the 3 important parts of this matrix. That's how it works, and that's how you can create one. Cool. Now, number 3 is learning how to learn. The forgetting curve, what you see here is that you forget quite a bit in the first 9 hours, first day or so of the of learning. So what you should do is basically revise and reinforce your learning over that, because then the forgetting curve will start from you if you give a new input, and that's how you can get a better learning experience out of it. Here we go. So the Baker-Baker paradox, also that's the Mr. Baker. Remember in the class we've had a picture of Mr. Baker and the occupation. The person who was, his profession was being a baker. And we saw that actually the occupation is much easier to remember for some reason than the actual name, which was a bit weird, even though it's the same word, but in a context. Context dependence, gone badly. What you see is that here this matrix is about testing and learning. So that you see that the environment is very important for learning and then testing. So if you are studying in a certain environment, and you take the test in the same environment, you actually perform better than if you study in one environment and you test in a different one. So that would say it, for us it's not a problem in this case, in this semester, because we have to study from home and then take the test at home as well. But for example, if we were at school, if we had access to campus, then if you would have studied at campus, you might be able to perform better because you're already in the right environment and an environment where you are performing better. Note-taking process, how you do that, encoding and storage, that's important, but I don't think that I'm going to take way too much time on that. Exactly. Yeah. So how you read is the PQ4R method by Thomas and Robinson from 1972. Preview, question, read, reflect, recite, and review. This is how you encode and store a lot of information, especially while reading. So you can have also a big book that you are reading, or a big number of information you can process quite well. Now, retrieval practice, that's what you have to do in, what you should do for exam preparation as well. Basically, just try to solve problems instead of just reading about it and trying to encode and store information. As you can see here, that study method, the 4S method, it works for the first 5 minutes at the best, but then after 1 week, it's significantly lower than the other two methods. So study, test is one way, but also study, test is actually the more efficient way, because even in 5 minutes, okay, you're not going to get as much of the result, but then in the end, after 1 week, you'll have it much better. So now, for example, let's put it that way. For if you have want to revise for Excel, for FA or something, then if you start now, it might be better to study, test. But if you still have some topics that you're not sure of in micro, for example, you do that tonight or tomorrow morning, and then you would be better off just studying and revising for the 5 minutes. Retrieval practice, why is it so beneficial? Yeah, we saw that actually it's the studies encoding. Why is it beneficial? Basically, retrieval practice is because you're activating your brain, you're putting it into test mode, and your brain is actually to work for the information. It has to look for the information, and then you have to put the information down. It's much more efficient than just consuming, because if your brain is in consumption mode, it's not as how do you say that? It's not as well performing as if you are putting it under a test circumstance and then just letting it retrieve the information you already know. And this is also very easy. Basically, mass practice is way less efficient than distributed practice, but I think that's very self-explanatory. And the method of Loki and the memory palace is about identification of locations, encoding and retrieval. That's how it works. The Mind Palace, a game we've played in, I think in class, where we had to go into our house and then mentally and then place certain objects in certain rooms. And this is just the Mind Palace theory, how you do that. And why it's important is because the encoding and retrieval works pretty well in this situation. So who we are, overconfidence, that we've seen as well, and we've taken the test in class. How many people do you think you're more intelligent or less intelligent than EHL students? And what that means is the above average effect. So 80% of people think they're above average, which obviously is not true. Mathematically, that doesn't work. So we are too confident in our abilities, because obviously not all of those 80 of those just 24.24% can be smarter than 80% of the people. So that's what we have to be aware of, is that we might not be as well performing as we think we are initially. So the Barnum effect as well is about how people give very accurate, with very high accuracy to very vague description of personalities. So if you, this is the test we did with a general description of this works, for example, with your your star signs. I don't know if this is the right word, but with the star signs and the whole horoscope things, it works pretty well, because they're making pretty general statements about personalities, pretty vague statements. But you think, oh yeah, that's definitely this is me. I see that. It's perfect. I can see myself in that. And This is what's called the Barnum effect. Quick question for you guys, Big Five theory, do you want to go through it or do you want to skip it because we've done our midterm on that? Quickly just give me a few opinions on what you want to do.
I guess yes.
Yes, Timo?
I think it's clear.
Okay, perfect. Anyone objecting? No? Okay, cool. Otherwise, as I said, you have the whole thing on there. Basically, here we go. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now we can look at which traits do predict overall job performance better. We see that openness to change and conscientiousness, which makes you follow rules, is actually then as well low emotional reactions. Those three basically contribute positively to job performance to various degrees. Because obviously openness to change will being able to get better in the new environment. Conscientiousness, you will follow the rules, which is good especially in a big company. And then low emotional reactions just makes you more task focused and less emotional. And on the last topic, is it always bad to have low emotional reactions? This is the patient SM by Feinstein. If you have no or very low emotional reactions, it can be that you're lacking your flight or fight response. So a lot of us would obviously run away if we had a bear just right in front of us, or a venomous snake, right? But people who lack that fight or flight response, they can't recognize fear, so they will just stay there and they will also not do anything about it because they are basically they just don't react to that, which is in certain situations very much against to what we should do. So can we change our personality? About that, technically some traumatic experience can negatively influence or aspects of the personality, but the overall personality doesn't really change. We see here though conscientiousness is a specific factor where it can change over the lifespan and probably does change because of course you take on more responsibilities, you have more life experience, and it will just go up to that point. The fit at work, here we go. So complementary fits. So what we have here is that different roles play together in one for a group and for a team, and then obviously also perform better, which means basically if there are more extroverted people, it can be positive or negative. So also having different personalities in a group will obviously help to achieve your goals better and perform better as a group. As supplementary fit, conscientiousness, for example, people who are conscientious, who share similar goals, it will be much easier for those people to work together and to work to a common goal than if you have different groups, different goals. And this is even personal goals. You might have seen that now in your group work as well. For example, if you have very different people within a group because of their goals, not even because of their personalities, but because of their goals. Some people, they just want to pass with a 4 average, and some people, they want to have a very high grade. Of course, then the actions you take in order to reach the goal is very different, and that might have caused some conflict. So that's where you see that actually supplementary fit is very important, that you can agree on stuff, and especially on goals. Here we go. Quick overview that certain jobs, of course, differ in what personality traits you need. So that's very important. And here we go. Hexagonal model of vocational interests. Also speaking about what your interests are more or less in different categories. So I think all of them are pretty self-explanatory. You've all did the test, so I think that's pretty clear. And then you can actually attribute this hexagonal model with your Big Five. So depending on how your personality is, this will correspond obviously also to your vocational interests, and that's basically conscientiousness is conventional. So positive conscientiousness is more the conventional type. Extroversion has positive effect in enterprising and social, etc., etc. Here we go. Relationship between the Big Five and the 10 universal values. Universal values are just this matrix. Just have to understand that basically this is by Schwartz's theory that you have the 12 values, and you have obviously to a certain degree you have those values or have not. And also very important is that you have on the opposite sides of the circle are the opposite values that you have. Then this is how it basically works. So if your main focus is power, for example, you have to be low in agreeableness. On universalist benevolence, for example, you have to be high in agreeableness, etc., etc. So this also how this relates to one another. Now, predictors of success. Is experience a predictor of success? No. As we've seen in class, that yes, in the beginning, as you can see here, after 1 to 3 months, it is positively connotated. That means that, okay, in the beginning, you might have a person with more experience who will perform faster and better in that specific tasks of the job, but over the long term, it's basically not relevant anymore, even already after 6 to 12 months. So this is also what recruiters do wrong quite a lot of times. So I think that we will all experience on ourselves when we're looking for the second internship and then after graduation in the real world. Is because people are looking for 10 years of experience for an entry-level job. Well, we can't have that because we have never worked, and you have to go with how that works. Locus of control. Now, this is important that there is an external and internal locus of control. So what that basically means, an external locus of control is that you think that other people will control your destiny, your fate. And the internal locus of control is I will control my own destiny. So there is a difference in job performance and leadership style as well. So, for example, people who have an external locus of control, they will much more try to micromanage because they think that because of their own locus of control, because of their own views, that they think that other people need to be pushed and need to be told what to do in order to reach specific goals. However, if you have internal control, locus of control that's internal, what you need to do is, as leadership, it's more participative in style because everyone says, okay, those are individuals, they will perform better if they can do however they want it, and we have to discuss it together. So, yes, that's basically it. There's different forms of intelligence. So, is one form of intelligence enough? Yes or no? Well, there is quite a lot of them, but as you can see, but I think we haven't gone through all of them in specific. So GMA tests is the IQ test as we've seen, but as we also see is that this simple IQ test is actually very highly reliable, especially in job performance. So problem solving versus knowledge acquisition is also this basically, the GMA test high performance helps there. There's always a linear relationship between task performance and result on GMA tests. So very interesting thing to look for also in your job performance. Is it enough though for everything? Now we have the model of emotional intelligence. It's the ability to detect and manage emotional cues and information, which is also important, obviously, to some extent. So it obviously is a combination of the both of them, but the GMA tests, if you're just looking purely at tasks, is obviously better. But then, of course, someone can be very intelligent but an asshole, as we say. Sorry for the word. That also means if they don't have any emotional intelligence, they probably won't fit in the team, even though they're performing very well at their tasks. But as you can see here, that actually emotional intelligence doesn't outperform general intelligence. because yeah, how to say, it's pretty much as you can see, here we go. And emotional labor, of course, this is important for our industry. So in the customer service industry, where we are working in hospitality mostly, we of course have to have pretty high emotional intelligence in order to get the best service to the customer and in order to make them feel welcome, etc., etc. And here we've had this case study of the actress, I think, is living in New York, where you do there is a difference between surface acting, which is just expressed, so you're just acting something that you're actually not. I think some of you also have done that on internship as well. If the guest is very rude to you, but you still have to smile, still have to be polite, this is surface acting. Then deep acting is if you something you really truly believe how you feel and you're acting that. It's very different than genuine acting, obviously. That's that. Yeah, and the emotional dissonance is basically expressed versus felt, expressed versus surface acting versus deep acting. That's this imbalance that exists for certain jobs and in real life. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Here we go. Deep acting versus surface acting. How this works, of course. Emotional intelligence, extroversion, emotional stability will definitely contribute positively to deep acting, and the other way around negatively. The dark triad, the three different dark traits. Let's put it that way: it's narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellism. Narcissism is about being very self-centered, or thinking of yourself as being the best, or being the best at everything. Psychopathy is about killers. In class we've discussed this example of not being able to process emotional reactions and not being able to do that. So the person who has done the research on that, the scientist, is a psychopath himself. He has the same brain structure as a serial killer, but is able to control it. So he's a social psychopath in that case. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. And the Machiavellism is how you want to manipulate others and to what extent that should be. And now we also see that newer research is maybe sadistic personality trait should be added to this, but at the moment it hasn't been done so by science, so that's how far it goes. And this is just very important to know that it's not always bad to have those. To a certain degree, we are all psychopaths, as we've seen also in the test we've done, so just to be aware of that. Judging people, and are we different? So yes, of course we are different in, now speaking here about men and women, of course in height, in average height and everything, that is also genetic, and we definitely differ, but self-esteem, confidence, we're pretty much the same. So that's how this goes. So here, mathematical performance is very, and all of those, we can see that basically it's very similar in most cases, depending on where you are. So here we have the self-fulfilling prophecy. What that means is what we are expecting from something, right? We expect something to go wrong. Let's put it in a way. Now with the example of exams. Okay, you see that. Okay, I'm not good at maths. The math exam is not going to go well for me. Maybe you've told yourself that a week before. Okay, then what you will do is you will adapt your behavior because you were expecting that. You're waiting for a target response, and you confirm it, and you repeat it. Okay, so your behavior, you're not studying, or you're studying efficiently, or not to a certain degree. Your target response is going to be a bad grade, and that confirms your initial self-fulfilling prophecy, which is like, okay, oh yeah, I'm bad at maths. That cycle continues. So this is very important to be aware of that this can be a cycle that is either positive or negative. Of course, it depends on what the expectations and the rest are. And Pygmalion effect, high expectations improve performance in a given area. So this is under the self-fulfilling prophecy is the Pygmalion effect, that this is really the positive side of the whole thing. Now we go to stereotype threats. What the definition of this is the situation in which there is a risk of confirming a self-characteristic and negative stereotype about one's group. So what we've had in this case is the person, a black person in America, walking down the street, would get stared at in a very threatening manner or very negatively and would feel threatened by that. But if the same person would walk down the street with the people, let's say singing or humming Beethoven's music, some classical music, then it would be perceived as very differently. So it's definitely about stereotypes that work or don't work. So it depends always on the situation. So what we have also on the left-hand side is no gender difference has been found on this test, and tests usually produce a gender difference. So what we see here, which is very interesting, is that if you say before a test, it's a very hard, I think it was a very hard math test in this case again, that you say before that there is not been any gender differences, men and women perform pretty much equally. But if you say that it has been usually produced a gender discrepancy in the test results, you don't even say that men necessarily perform better than women, or the other way around, that men perform actually way higher than women. That's the stereotype threat, because that's what we have learned, and that's where you fall back in those situations. Other perceptual biases is the primacy effect. So you basically remember information that come first, you consider them as more important, and you will remember them also better, and you give them more importance as well. So similar to me effect is positive impression about people who share certain similarities to oneself. So I think you've seen that as well. If you're being introduced to a person that you like, and that you see, okay, this is very similar to me, you probably like this person more, even though there might be something very different about her or this person that you don't like. Halo effect is about drawing a general impression about the individual on the basis of a single characteristic. So basically, if you have someone who's unpunctual, you say that they're a bad person in general, they're bad at performing their job, etc., because of one single characteristic. This is contrast effect. Actually, I think you can read through all of those yourself. It's the definitions, and I think they're pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go through all of them. So basically, how to conduct interviews. About that is important that you're obviously aware of everything that we've been talking about before. So about the stereotype threats, about the biases, and then you have to make structured interviews, which means everything that's about past behavior, about situational background and job knowledge, is something that's very similar, and you can judge it on a very even scale. However, opinions, attitudes, goals, aspiration, and self-descriptions are very difficult, because you know that because of those biases, you're tending to fall. For example, if you give a self-description and you are very portraying a character trait that the interviewer possesses as well, the interviewer would basically say, okay, this person is similar to me, and that's why I like this person more. So that's very important that those type of interviews are conducted with different questions as well. So structured interviews very important. And of course, rating scales should be the same. Now, making rational decisions. We have basically two systems. That's the takeaway from this. System 1 is fast and non-unconscious, and system 2 is slow and what we are doing for more complex things, for more complex calculations or complex problems. Now, system 1 is actually very prone to be influenced by hereditary biases, and technically we should, obviously, in most situations, we should go for the system 2, because it's slower, it's more deliberate, it's more logical. So that's what we're going to talk about next. So we see that, that's this. So here we go. What we have here is in this specific, we have a few biases that we have because of system 1. Is the sunk cost fallacy. So what we want is we have 2 different options, and because of the cost of each of this, in this case will be monetary, right? Because it has cost you something, you will still get through it, even though something else would bring you higher satisfaction. Anchoring bias. Exactly. No, the understanding. Okay. Rely to have the first piece of information. That's very important. Like, for example, if we say this empire stability is shorter than 800 meters, you would probably get a different result than if you would ask how high is the empire stability in general. That's the anchoring bias. It's always about the first piece of information. Then framing effects. People are risk averse when options are presented with positive connotations. So a possible gain, I did write it wrong on this slide. And people are risk seekers when options are presented with negative connotations. So if you have possible loss, that people are even more risk seekers than they would be otherwise. For example, in a casino, okay, you can lose all your money, but but the possibility of something winning, you will get more of a risk seeking. That's the framing effect. And confirmation bias is basically you're looking specifically for certain information that will confirm your previous beliefs and values, and this is very dangerous because then you also go on the same sites. What this is basically a very interesting case is on social media. The algorithm basically does that. So because of your preferences, you're only going to get information that will cater to your preferences. And of course, if you're we have this problem now with alternative facts, right? So people who live in a totally factually different world than what's actually real, they always get fed that in social media, gets fed the same information, and they obviously feel confirmed. They confirm again and confirm again, and then of course they will believe it at some point. Here we go. So this is the rational decision model, maybe also something to just write down for your exam, how you decide, and it's very similar to the goal setting theory as well. Now about team barriers, that brainstorming is in quantity and quality performs worse than nominal group, which nominal group is just a group which shares the information. So brainstorming is the group technique which you all know. So what may be better is brainwriting. What you do is you sit in a group and you write everything on a piece of paper, and then you exchange your opinions at the end, which basically means, because also a lot of people, they don't like to speak up in a group. You have that, for example, in a brainstorming phase or in a group phase when you want to present yourself in the beginning when you're in a group, okay? That's the shy people, they don't really like that situation, and they're probably not going to say as much representative information as other people. So 4 basic rules for brainstorming: be expressive and postpone evaluation and seek quantity, which means postpone evaluation basically means don't interrupt the person when the person is saying something, but then evaluate all the alternatives at the end, and modify and extend other ideas. And that's basically it. The drawbacks. Here we go. Brainwriting, that's what I've just described before. It has the very good positive effect that it's really non-judgmental. Of course, takes a bit more time. So we have 3 different problems when it comes to group decision making. It's the group thinking phenomenon, the norms of consensus overrides the realistic appraisal of alternatives. We've had this here with this experiment about the light, and there was a study, I think, from France in 2012, where people were sitting in a room, and all other people were in an experiment. They knew they were in the experiment, but one person wasn't. And the rules would all say wrong answers. And the person who was in the experiments, they would, in the end, have a tendency to share that information. There's also the shared information bias, so the people are discussing technically more about stuff that they agree on rather than unique information that only few agree on. That's actually more productive. So this is very important that you know that the stuff you agree on you can leave to one side, and then obviously go to the more uncomfortable topics that you have to decide on. Yeah, and then the group polarization is basically, you can make a person's opinion shift based on the group decision. That's what I've talked about before, about this experiment. What can be done to diminish biases? We need visual aids. So we don't really need to have a leader, especially in this information, in this how do you say, in a group. Sorry, in a group situation, that you don't technically need a leader, and don't try to reach a consensus too quickly. So we need really to use the system to here again, what we've talked about before, is using the system to have a slower process, but then giving better and more differentiated solutions out of a group work. Power and influence. We have leadership emergence versus leadership effectiveness. So it's also quite tolerable to narcissism or prone to narcissism. So what we have is that narcissism contributes to perceived authority, and perceived authority then will automatically lead to perceived effectiveness. So people who are highly authoritarian, they are perceived as more effective, even though they're not really. And then, of course, you have leadership effectiveness, which is information exchange. So if you're less narcissistic, then you will exchange more information, also accept other information, and this will lead to better group performance. Here we see the different characteristics that will lead to either leadership emergence or leadership effectiveness, with a certain variance on performance, on how it correlates. So we can see, for example, that conscientiousness is in leadership effectiveness not necessarily as important as, for example, extroversion or openness. So need for achievement is maybe not necessarily the best way for leadership. This is also need of power is very important, for example. And need of affiliation, friendship, close interpersonal relationships is technically also not really sufficient or beneficial, not beneficial for being a leader, because you are after all having to be a bit be a bit more assertive when it comes to certain problems and to certain situations. Here we have the 5 sources of power: position power, coercive. I think it's everything. These are all the same definitions as we've had in class. So I think it's very. Do you have a question? I will just quickly get you to take like 1 minute to read through it. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on if everything is clear. Do you have any questions, guys, on this slide, or shall we move on? Are the definitions clear? No? Okay, perfect. Here we go. Proactive influence tactics. I mean, this is also pretty, pretty self-explanatory, I guess. And also this one, core tactics and tactics of how to lead to commitment. There's 3 different levels, basically. There's rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, consultation. That's what we've seen here, basically. there's different proactive influence tactics that you can use, and there's obviously 3 different categories in terms of effectiveness. So for commitment and for compliance, they're both commitment obviously the best if people are getting committed by themselves for a certain cause. Compliance is when they comply. Yes, it's okay, they will do it, but maybe with a little apprehension. And resistance is basically what you should not do. Also here, I think the definitions are pretty clear about that. The last one, basically coalition. So looking for others to also help you convince someone else. Legitimation and pressure, definitely also not really the most effective tactics, even though often used, of course, in certain situations. Now, managing performance, the law of effect. Many of our activities or of our everything we do is based on consequence. So positive reinforcement is bonus or praises, negative reinforcement is a threat or fear. And the law of effect is basically the response that received by positive outcomes in a given situation will be repeated if we get a positive outcome. But then again, if you have a negative situation, you try to find out how to make that negative consequence go away. Contingent reinforcement, non-contingent reinforcement is basically the it's less it's more the delivery of a positive stimulus rather than negative stimulus, rather than getting rid of the elimination of negative stimulus, and then contingent obviously different, the opposite, but that's also on the slide, so it's pretty clear with the definition, I guess. So positive reinforcement, as you can see, is on employee task performance definitely much better than, for example, punishment. But however, in group performance, it's surprisingly similar, actually. That positive reinforcement and punishment can be very close together. And this is basically because, of course, the group doesn't want to, doesn't want to underperform. And then certain examples can be made of people who did failures, other people will do more to avoid this, and then the performance again will be better. So here we see also how punishment can be very bad for certain things. So what you see is here that daycare in Israel has had a lot of latecomers, and they've introduced a fine for people if they came late. And what you see here is that basically the group with the fine, they came late even more than other in the other group. So this also can obviously, fines can also be perceived very differently and have very different effects to what we actually want. Unlike, for example, if you drive too fast or if you do something else, because especially driving too fast in Switzerland, as many non-Swiss people who drive cars and have gotten a fine here, they can attest to, is quite painful if you have to pay that much money for only driving a little bit too fast. Yeah, also here, tangible reinforcement, social reinforcements, and work-related. I think it's basically reinforcing a behavior that you want to do, want to see again. So also very different. So what we have here is different types of reinforcement. So the variable ratio is a schedule of reinforcement where a response is reinforced an unpredictable number of responses. So we see that the variable ratio is actually performs much more responses. And for example, the fixed variable interval or fixed interval. So the fixed ratio is basically a number of schedules where the response is reinforced after a specific number of responses. So in this case, we've been talking about in this chapter a lot about the mouse in the cage. So the more the mouse presses on the lever, the faster or the more they will get a treat. And then fixed intervals obviously at a fixed time, and variable intervals are intervals that will do it at a certain point, but they will the rat will, for example, get the food at a certain point, but they will know, okay, at some point, yeah, I will get it anyways, so I will put less effort in it than if you don't know if you are getting more. That's basically how this graph can be interpreted. Different rewards. What do we have? That's basically salary and hourly pay. It's not really positive reinforcement. Can be good, but we've seen employee of the month is not really an effective way of doing it. And variable tipping is actually very good for performance, especially now. For example, we have had the example with the tipping system in America, that people get paid based on their tips mainly. Here we see what the problem is with employee of the month. Is the criteria very unclear? Creates competition, can create obviously distance in time from behavior. What we see here is as well distance in time from behavior, which means what we should do in reinforcement theory is that we should reinforce as close to the action as possible. So the longer you wait, the less value you will have on the people. And the danger of the system is in place that changes the winner every month, which is then obviously makes it random. And we see when it's random, we'll get a bit more responses, but it's not really, the enforcement will not, if the criteria are not clear, reinforcement will be very little. So here we go. For example, the financial incentives. What they've seen here is that the performance quantity was extremely high if you get a financial incentive, but the performance quality was pretty much the same, also slightly positive, but not that much. So what you see when we have hourly pay or pay per unit that's produced or per unit that's repaired in this case, it actually works. Productivity has been significantly increased in this example now for Safe Light Auto Glass, but of course quality has been the same, which is actually pretty good. So financial incentives can definitely be a very good way of doing it. Yeah, there's also obviously differences in financial incentives. It's risk-taking, excessive competition with the firm, neglect of performance measures not attached to incentives, and excessive focus on goals. So here we have this, the problem here can be, for example, we have a very successful restaurant company in Zurich, which is called Piclat, and what they do in summer, especially, they are paying their employees based on the revenue generated. So a certain percentage. So the more revenue they make, obviously the more they get paid. So this will obviously you have to have systems in place to prevent that, because then people obviously started at some point apparently stealing people's tables, because you get paid by your station, how much revenue your station makes. So they were starting to steal tables, steal guests and everything, and got very competitive. So here financial incentives would definitely not work, or if you would have a system like that in place, you definitely have to have regulating factors that will help to that, to reinforce the performance points. Yes, so over-justification effect, also self-explanatory, I think. So basically, that's extrinsic rewards decrease intrinsic motivation, that thing. Here we go, engaging people. So yeah, distributive justice is pursuing this fairness, amount of allocations of reward among individuals, which we have three possibilities here: is equity, equality, and need. Distribution depends on how that works. So procedural justice, also I think very, very self-explanatory. I will skip this quickly because it's the last thing we've done, so I think pretty clear as well. Manager is not taking the biggest part of the share for him or her. So procedural justice, sharing tips in a fair manner. Here in this case, you need to obviously have clear, fair distribution practices. So no favoritism, criteria are known in advance. This is very important, and data of the performance are objective as possible. So of course you have to have objective KPIs in some kind of way to get that result. And interactional justice, being treated with dignity, concern, and respect. And there's the personal justice, empathy or transparency, where you obviously have with your boss. That's very interesting there, how you can see that, but also all the definitions are here. I'm not going to go over them because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. How can you boost fundraising? That's the task significance. So what we have here is task identity and task significance. Designing interesting jobs. So what you have is an identical piece of work. So here, for example, it's very important if you're creating a job that the person who's doing the job can identify themselves with the result and can have actually something tangible that they want to work for. And the task significance is to which degree a person thinks this task is has a substantial impact on their life and on the life of the company. And this is getting even more important, I think, in our generation now. This is now me talking personally. It's that task significance and task identity are very important for us, because we don't want to just work for a corporation where we don't have an impact, where we don't do anything, and in the end we are being frustrated and at home. And I think that's the very big portion of people who are being frustrated with their jobs, is because they lack to see the task significance or task identity. Different motivations. We have, first of all, intrinsic and extrinsic, but then you also obviously have a motivation, so everything that's extrinsic. Then you have true intrinsic motivation. This obviously varies to some degree, but this is also, all the definitions are here. I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm just going to give you quickly 1 minute to do that. We're almost done, so if you have any questions, then please let me know. Yes, Claudia?
Where can you get the presentations?
The presentation is on EHL recap. I think the code is EHL recap, capital EHL, and then recap, the R is capital as well, I think. Alex, can you please confirm that? Maybe Alex doesn't hear me. Okay, yeah, but it's on EHL recap. There is the instructions are on the Instagram channel as well, if you want them. So there's all the presentations from all the subjects are there. And this video is going to be on YouTube.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you have any other questions, guys? Or can we move on for the last few slides? No? Okay. Perfect. So how can we increase intrinsic motivation? Basically, we need to fulfill some basic needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And this is obviously, all those three factors will help you to increase intrinsic motivation. So how much you're related to a task, how much autonomy you have, and how much competences you're given to complete the task. And then obviously surveillance, deadlines, negative feedback, competition, evaluation, and all of this is killing intrinsic motivation. That's depends on obviously the organization, obviously also the leadership that you receive in a company, for example. Yeah, how to satisfy those needs? Here are definitions as talked before. Recognition practices. Also, I think nothing that's difficult to understand. And so, combination theory versus reinforcement theory. What we have is joint effect of incentives and intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation obviously positively related to performance, as we've seen before. Even when incentives are in place, that intrinsic motivation is actually more valuable. And the effect of controlling the reward versus informational rewards and intrinsic motivation. You can also then obviously show that simple and complex tasks will definitely complexer tasks will keep the intrinsic motivation up. So guys, this is it. I think the last few slides were pretty self-explanatory as well. A lot of definitions in the last few chapters, so if you want to read through them on your own pace, that's perfect. Thank you very much for listening. Again, just as a tip, maybe do a summary of all the theories with maybe 1 or 2 sentences for each theory, like the most important part, so you can relate that then again in the exam to some kind of the case study we have to do and the descriptions we have to make. Yes. Do you have any questions left? No more questions? Okay, perfect. Guys, I wish you all the best. Good luck for your exams. And I'll see you all in BOSC 2. Happy and without retakes. Have a nice day, guys. Bye.